Hey everyone, it's Denise Brown from the Caregiving Years Training Academy. Thanks to those who are joining us live. Thanks to those who are joining via the recording. We are here to talk about the emergency beginning to caregiving. We had a conversation last week around the path to the diagnosis, and so we're continuing the conversation about how caregiving can begin. And that's the focus this week, when there's a medical emergency that a family member has. And I wanted to start to really position our conversation a little bit with some insights about what it's like for us as the family members when someone in the family has a medical emergency. And this will not be a surprise to any of you, but it's just helpful, I think, to look at this and think, wow. So a traumatic stress reaction includes having a physical reaction. So we might think, why am I so tired? It's part of our traumatic stress reaction to a medical emergency. Now, this is not just only to a medical emergency, but it's helpful for us to remember when a family member has a medical emergency, we also have a reaction to it. We also experience shock, numbness, fear, anxiety. We have difficulty concentrating, remembering, and making decisions. And then we might be surprised by a change in behavior. We might think, why am I doing things that I didn't do before? The other piece of this that I thought was interesting was the spiritual component. Why me? Why us? Where is God in this situation? And I wanted to give you an insight into how prevalent is post-traumatic stress symptoms among family caregivers. And the research that I found says 1 in 3. And I think it's probably really 3 in 3, right? If we really start to think of it. Because it's all of us. Anytime you're in a caregiving situation, you're going to have trauma because of something you've witnessed, something you've experienced. I found this research around bystanders and family members who witnessed interventions during an emergency from EMTs. And here's what some of the research found. That during the emergency, there were extremes in terms of emotional responses. And the extremes were from hope to hopelessness, chaos to calm. And then here's the piece that we all experience, and that is we dread and fear death. Our family member will die during this medical emergency. I'll share the PowerPoint when I send a follow-up email tomorrow about the archive, so you guys can do a little bit of a bigger, deep dive into the research. For some reason, that was a tongue twister for me. So we have 3 panelists joining me today, and I'm going to ask the panelists to do a brief introduction, tell us a little bit about yourself, and tell us about your experience with a family member's medical emergency. Angelina, let's start with you.
Hi, Denise. Thank you for having me on the panel today. Hello, everyone. My name is Angelina Taylor. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I've been caring for my father, who is a Vietnam-era Marine veteran who suffered a stroke 8 years ago. I've been caring for him since then, and all of my caregiving experience has been around caring for him post-stroke and managing his immobility and inability to care for himself since then.
Angelina, I wonder if you can tell us where you were and what you were doing at the time of your dad's stroke.
Yes, absolutely. So the day of my dad's stroke, I had actually been making my way home from work that day. I just started a career as a registered behavior technician, still relatively new to the field. And part of my routine with my dad being retired and me still living at home, he'd be out and about, running errands or helping take care of things with some of his siblings. helping them manage their healthcare needs and whatnot. And on the way home from work one day, unlike my dad to answer the phone, he's always reachable. I didn't get a response when I tried to reach out to him to figure out what we were going to do for dinner. Not thinking anything of it, thought he was at home taking a nap, and we'd handle things when I get home. I found him at home in bed, and the closer that I, approached him in bed, realizing he wasn't responsive when I, started asking him questions and whatnot, I noticed the immediate signs of him suffering a stroke, which was the facial drooping, arm unable to move, some slurred speech, and knew that it was time for me to give the EMS a call and, get him to the hospital. So it went from normal day leaving work to having to get my dad rushed to the hospital after a stroke.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Dawnita, let's go to you.
Thanks for having me, Denise, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Dawnita Brown, and I am from Baltimore, Maryland. I was actually at the close of my service as a Peace Corps volunteer in Eswatini, Africa, when I learned that my mom was on life support. So that was August 5th, 2018. I took a flight home August 6th, 2018, and August 7th is when the caregiving journey started. I thought that I was going to be saying my goodbyes to my mom since she was on life support. She was intubated, all of those things, that they weren't really sure what happened to her because they knew she had a stroke. She had a subdural hematoma it was a brain bleed, but the stroke, it affected her left side, which they couldn't understand because the stroke they thought initially was on the left side, but after a few days they determined that it was a brainstem stroke, which typically leaves people in a locked in state, like Christopher Reeves. But she was one of the few that actually survived that locked in syndrome. So it's been 6 years, approaching 6 years in August, that I've been caring for her. She is immobile. Her left side is severely weakened as a result of the brainstem stroke. She was a tube feeder. So post the neurocritical care in the hospital, she did the short-term rehab at a skilled nursing facility for 2 months. And I brought her home, despite everybody else's recommendation to let her go into long-term. I brought her home without knowing how to tube feed. Like, they gave me a quick training, but it's kind of once you get home, on the job training. I didn't have gloves. I wasn't prepared, but you just kind of learn. You build the plane as you're flying it. And so, like I said, she was a tube feeder. She's now taking food by mouth and has been. We had the tube removed. So we're kind of, she's very stable. Her cognitive is much better. She did not have any cognitive ability. And so mine went from the emergency and back to your slides, Denise. When I got to the airport, like, I was so winded, and I couldn't understand because in Africa, I was walking 5 miles a day easily just to take public transportation. But it was just like all of these emotions for what I didn't even know was going on, just other than my mom being on life support, right? So I'm just creating the narrative in my head of what's going to happen and all this, everything, right? And so, I get home, and then, of course, learning the whole healthcare system. And then, now, but it's a lot, especially when it's something I feel like, and like with you, Angelina, we're like sudden caregivers. We're
Yes.
like with a diagnosis,
Yes.
like Alzheimer's or something, that it's kind of progressive, and you now, with all of the education and awareness that everybody's putting out there, you kind of know that this is a slow thing. But as a sudden caregiver, it just hits you, and you have to kind of figure out, how do I navigate caring as well as caring for myself?
Debbie, let's move to you. You actually have, I'm not even sure how to position this in an effective way. You have a history of medical emergencies that started when you were really in high school.
Yes. Well, and again, thank you for having me as well. And just listening to Angelina and Dawnita's stories, like my heart is actually pounding. Feeling that feeling, it's like it just puts you right back there, and I'm there with you as you're describing it, since unfortunately we all know it too well. My journey did start actually the day after I graduated from high school. I was 17. My father, at days before his 46th birthday, had a massive stroke while he was driving. It was 1981, so it was a very different time than it is today. And at 46 years old, people didn't have strokes. And it just, he survived. He had the stroke that affected the left side of his body. My parents soon divorced after he had the stroke, and I became his primary caregiver for the next 30 years of his life. He did not live with me. He was able to live in an independent living facility. Unfortunately, everybody else was in their 80s, and he was not yet 50. And it was, it was not what I expected my life to be as I was about to set off on my college experience. And then what Denise was saying, in addition to that, I have also been the caregiver for my son, who suffers from a variety of mental illness, but my husband, who also suffered from mental illness and physical illness, and just coming out of a really positive mental illness hospitalization where finally things were looking up. Out of the blue, he was hit with a terminal blood cancer diagnosis, and I became his full-time caregiver for the next 6 months until he passed away.
I want to thank the three of you so much for sharing your story and for being here today to talk it out. And I'm curious, when did you realize that you had experienced trauma and that you were feeling the impact of trauma in terms of how your body felt, how you felt emotionally, how you might have felt spiritually?
I want to answer that because I think the fact that mine began so many years ago, I had no idea. I had no idea there was a name for what I had been doing. I never heard of a family caregiver. I didn't understand that I was experiencing trauma. And I'm so pleased that nowadays we are a community. And so I don't think that I really truly realized it until about 5 years ago.
I want to stay with you for another question, Debbie. So I'm curious, how did that lack of awareness impact how you moved through life?
It was very isolating, especially starting at such a young age, when I watched all my friends in their 20s do what you're supposed to do in your 20s, live a carefree, fun life. And I was worried about, my dad. We didn't have a lot of money. My dad didn't have many benefits at that age. How was we going to pay for his housing and doctors and therapies and all that kind of thing? So I felt sorry for myself.
Understandably so. Understandably so. A life interrupted without support that could help you figure out, how do I manage this? How do I do for myself too? I'm curious for you guys, when my parents had critical illnesses at the same time, I was managing their emergencies, and it felt like overnight I gained 30 pounds. Like I could get into a pair of jeans and then I couldn't. And I'm curious if there were any other things that happened to your body that you were just like, what is going on here? because of the stress and the impact of the medical emergency?
Yeah, I can say that I gained weight too. Especially like in the hospital, you eat and the cafeteria food, pizza like every day. And I wasn't even thinking about it. And then, like I said, I was coming from Africa, from fresh foods to sub shops and everything like in the city. And I did not take care of myself at all. Like I completely neglected myself. Everything that I did was focused on my mom. So I didn't think about me at all. And so I learned through the process of considering me, considering that in order to take care of her, I have to take care of me. So that was something that I learned along the way, to, exercise, incorporate all of those things to keep me sane as well. To Debbie's point, I was isolated in that I didn't have caregivers who had gone through this journey. People were there to support. So I had people around me, but did not have this community of people. So I think that was something that I got as a result. And again, it's that whole analogy of building a plane as you're flying it. You're learning everything as you go along. But I'm so with you on the weight gain and just kind of unhealthy habits, because you just don't know what to do and you're just kind of on autopilot. But I will say the spiritual component, I turned more toward God, like, because I needed God to do this thing. I mean, still do. So I would say that my faith got stronger during this journey, and so it's helped me to now be the caregiver that I am.
Angelina, how about for you? Curious about any changes in terms of behavior, your own well-being, and then how you figured out how to keep yourself in the equation.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely can agree and attest to the weight gain. And unfortunately, a lot of medical providers were not, I don't think they really made that correlation of, oh, you're a caregiver, you're enduring a lot of new stress, you are, maybe experiencing higher cortisol levels from that stress. And many of them, because I was 28 when I started my caregiving journey, they attributed it to me turning 30. So they're like, once you get older, you're going into your 30s, your body's still changing, a lot of this weight gain and all that comes with, you getting older. And me not knowing any better, it's like, oh, well, this is the part they don't tell you about getting older and going into your 30s, which, obviously as you get older, your body's going to change in different ways. But it wasn't until within the last few years that I started considering, like, hey, you've been under a lot of stress the last 8 years. Of course, you're going to have all these changes. And for me, it's pretty noticeable because I'm on more of the petite side. Even with my dad, having his stroke and having to learn from his physical therapists and whatnot before he came home, they even had made comments like, I'm only 5'2". So they were like, oh my gosh, you're so small. How are you going to take care of him on your own? You're so, how are you going to do this? So it's like all the changes that I endured, physically were pretty obvious for me. But in addition to like the weight gain, I did experience a lot of depression and anxiety. Those trauma responses of, is he going to make it through the night? What do I expect? Is he going to have another stroke? I know there's lots of research on, once you've had the first stroke, you're more than likely to suffer a second or multiple as the years go on. So it's, kind of like that waiting game of, is his medication managing enough to where he won't experience anything? Are we going to experience another episode of some sort? So in the beginning, there was a lot of, sleepless nights of worrying of what's to come next. Is he going to be okay? especially after losing my mom at a young age, as well as I lost my mother when I was in high school. So it's always, at least in the beginning, it was a lot of, oh my goodness, you know, how long am I going to have him with me? So it was a very stressful period, especially the first, you know, few years.
There's a couple things. It's interesting that the physical therapists were asking you, how are you going to do this? Instead of saying, how can we help you do this?
Mm-hmm.
Could you imagine the difference if they had said, we want to help you be successful at this at home. What do you
Yes.
need from us? Rather than leaving this doubt in your head that, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to do this, which is like the last thing you need to hear.
Yes, absolutely. I think it would have made a world of difference. The people that did come out to the house afterwards when we did home care, when he was discharged, they were much more helpful and much more reasonable with what to expect and what to do. Our first occupational therapist that we had even said, like, hey, you're transferring him wrong. You're going to do more damage to yourself and not be able to help him if you continue to do what you're doing. So I was very thankful for that occupational therapist that came out, because me not knowing any better and not being trained properly, it's like, you know, I would be doing more damage. And what a lot of people don't understand too, when you are doing all that physical lifting and maneuvering for your loved one, it does wear and tear on your body. So me at 36, I'm feeling a lot more than a lot of my peers probably are feeling, because they have not, you know, cared for a loved one and have to do all the physical things that they have to take care of. So I've, you know, had my own rounds of having to go to physical therapy as a result of the care that I provide.
I want to just mention one other thing about this weight gain, and then I'll move on, because this weight gain, I could talk about it for days, but I was having a conversation with a colleague and I said, you know, when my parents were ill at the same time, I was so stressed out, I gained 30 pounds and it felt like it was overnight. And he said to me, well, you weren't taking care of yourself. I can't even begin to tell you how mad that made me, because I thought, of course I was taking care of myself. I was doing whatever I could. They survived. They lived through this. I lived through this. I was taking care of myself. It was the enormity of the stress. That's what happens to your body. It was my body's response to the stress. That's what it was. These judgments around that we're not taking care of ourselves really just make me crazy, because they don't help us. They don't help us. Okay, so that's my soapbox about that. I'm wondering.
Excuse me,
Oh
one
yeah,
second.
go for
I
it.
just
Go
want to
for it.
piggyback on that, because we don't know that we're not taking care of ourselves. Because like I said, I work out, I do all the things. I'm petite like you, Angelina. And you know, it's like I didn't realize all of the wear and tear I was doing on my body until I had surgery the beginning of the year. I had a hysterectomy. And as a result of the hysterectomy, I had a small bowel obstruction, which they had to do another emergency surgery. But when I spoke with my therapist, therapy is important too. Like that has to be part of your self-care. But when I spoke with my therapist, because I had some issues going on in November, um, with I had hemorrhoids, and then in December, my back went out on me. And then in January, February, March, I was having all of these issues with my digestive area. And she said, if you continue to go like you're going, the next organ is your heart, like you're working your way up. And because I do all of the things, you know, I work out, I journal, I do all the things, I thought that I was taking care of myself. But because, again, we're on autopilot, just going and going and going, you don't realize the level of stress, both physically, mentally, that caregiving is taking on your body. Like it takes a tremendous toll. I had a friend take me to my doctor's appointment, and after the appointment, we went to Costco, which, you know, I would do, get water and all that. And I like had an out of body experience because a caregiver was here with my mom, taking care of my mom. And then my friend was unloading my groceries, and I was telling them everywhere they go. And I looked and said, wait, I do all of this myself. It wasn't until I had surgery and had to have people help me that I realized how much help I need. So now the caregiver is coming over daily. I mean, of course, it costs more, but I want to make sure that I live. I want to make sure that I'm taking care of myself holistically and not just one component. So, to your point about taking care of yourself, we could think that we're taking care of ourselves, but it's so much more than, the actual doing. It's more of being kinder to yourself, taking time to just step away and breathe, even if it's a few minutes throughout your day, just to add that into kind of what you're doing for your loved one every day.
Okay, so that's a great insight about expectations we have of ourselves. What do I expect I can manage and do on a daily basis? And what happens, there's this medical emergency, a family member returns home, the healthcare system looks to you, right? So it's up to you now. And the expectation is you're going to keep your caree alive and you're going to provide quality of life for your caree. And there's little conversation about integration for you into the equation. So how do we adjust our expectations around what's possible and realistic for us? And Debbie, I'll start with you.
When you were talking, honestly, I started thinking more about my husband and my caregiving there than with my father. They were very different experiences, and maybe because my husband's is fresh in my mind. But I realized I was, I was going to fall apart. It was just all too much. I have a business, so I'm trying to run the business from not being there, from being home, from my husband again, who had this blood cancer, but also had slipped back into mental illness with depression and anxiety. So he was not easy to manage. My children, who are older, but still, again, my older son has mental illness and their father was dying. And my dog, the groceries, like everything that you could possibly think of. And, the heart palpitations came back. I've had them many times in my life. And I recognized that that was a sign, because it seems to me I don't get them in the moment. I get them when it's almost not too late, but the buildup has been so much, like, bing, 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 you're in trouble. You better do something. And the funny thing is that at the time that my husband had the diagnosis, I was kind of like looking to do some other things on my own, separate from my business. And one of the things I was thinking about was writing a book. And I had come across a woman who ran a course for first-time authors, and I was going to take it. And then my husband got diagnosed. And I talked to my therapist, and I sheepishly said, well, I know this isn't the right time to do this. I mean, look at what I'm walking into right now. And thankfully, she said, I disagree with you. This is the perfect time to do this, because you are going to need something separate from what you're going through, unrelated, just for yourself. And she was right. And those writing meetings that were once a week, and then what turned into daily writing times, I carved out for myself, and I set a boundary, just like we were talking about before, stepping away. That was my forced stepping away that I made sure that I did. When my husband was in the hospital, I came to that hospital like I looked like I was moving in with all my gear. And when my husband was sleeping, I was typing. And I just made it work. And that kept me sane for 6 months.
Okay, let's just go a little bit farther with that, Debbie. So you published the book,
Mhm.
and then last November, what happened?
Last November.
You were on the Kelly Clarkson
Oh, right.
show.
Oh, right. Oh my gosh. I was thinking back to the November before. Yes.
Okay.
So this past November, I was extremely privileged to be on the family from Kelly Clarkson show for National Family Caregiver Month. So yes, it was very exciting. It was a Skype segment just like this. I did it right from here. My little computer screen said NBC, and there was Kelly, where Denise is. And yeah, that was a culmination. It was really an incredible experience. And I actually was introduced to that connection through something having to do with my book. So, you know, full circle.
Okay, I love this because it's expectation that I'll put something on hold, that something else is more important, that there's a pressing need that's the priority. Angelina, I'm wondering how you have managed expectations of what's possible for yourself so that you do feel like there is a life for me today.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned before, starting out at 28 was just completely, it was mind blowing because, like I said, going into your 30s, you're expecting your life to look one way. And that definitely led to a lot of uncertainty, depression. But I was able to connect with a really good therapist myself and be able to manage my mental health that way and have a different perspective on what, you know, these life changes were bringing. And it helped to recenter a lot of stuff because instead of having the mindset that typically flows through a lot of caregivers of, you know, my life is over, you know, this is not what I expected my life to look at or look like. It just turned into you know, well, this is where we are now. How can we keep going? What can we do to, you know, turn this into a positive experience? So I set lots of boundaries with what I would allow and what I wouldn't allow as far as like my dad's care goes. He's with him being a Marine veteran, like there's a lot of, you know, we got like a big military attitude here in the household. So I'm like his little mini warrior. So I go to bat for anything that he needs and I don't take no for an answer. So it's like, okay, this therapist won't work out for you. This doctor doesn't work. I'm going to keep, you know, going until you get the best care. And then for myself, I make sure to carve out some time to do the stuff that I love. I was really big into traveling before my dad had his stroke. That's something we've always done when I was younger. So that's something that I keep going with. And with the respite hours that we get provided through his VA benefits, I make out a lot of time throughout the year to go on trips. I started competing in pageantry. So I either go on trips or I use my respite time to compete. And, you know, he understands. At first, he wasn't a fan because he likes to be at home. But we have an understanding that, you know, if I'm not taking care of myself, I can't take care of him. So he's been in a better space of, you know, she needs this just like I do. He's always well taken care of at the respite facilities that we use. They love him. He's like another dad and granddad and stuff to the staff. So you know, keeping therapy and respite in perspective has helped me tremendously these last few years.
There was something that you started talking about, Angelina, that I wanted to go back to a little bit, and that is dreading. And we saw that when we were looking at the slides and the insights about PTSD. And I'm curious if you still have any dreads and if you figured out a way to manage anything that you might be dreading.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Sorry, this is our topic. We do have those conversations about what we do, you know, openly have those conversations about what things will look like, you know, when he does make his transition. The last few years have been actually kind of rough because we've lost so many family members in succession. We lost my older sister. He lost both of his sisters within the last year. So he talks about what the end looks like for him. So I think that helps a little bit to kind of like prepare things, but excuse me. That's still, you know, a day that I don't look forward to for sure. So there's a lot of anticipatory grief, a lot of, you know, when's the other shoe going to drop? But he's relatively healthy right now. Like he doesn't have any outstanding health issues or anything that would immediately suggest, you know, that his time is close or whatnot. So I'd tell him, you know, we're gonna make the best of the time that he does have here. I encourage him to, you know, get up and about whenever we can. Um, Even though he likes to be at home watching his movies, but you know, we really cherish these last days and stuff because we never know when that's coming. So we just, you know, it makes it hard to think about, but those conversations do help keep both of us prepared for sure.
You know, thank you for staying with this question, because what you're demonstrating to us is how real that dread is, even as we don't articulate it. It is something that is ever present in our head, ever present in our heart. We are in a state of dreading. And I think the state eases at times and then it heightens at times. And we are going through our day interacting with people with a dread that is something that others cannot understand. And I'm grateful that you brought us into that dread, Angelina. Thank you for that. That was really powerful and really helpful, really helpful. Dawnita, I can see you nodding. Tell us about what you're thinking.
What she said totally resonates with me. Unlike my fellow panelists, I was older. I was 43 when 45 actually, when my mom had her stroke. But I had already planned to live my life out in Africa. Y'all hear me? My heart is still in Africa. But you know, I'm here now. And so we're 6 years in. And like Angelina said, she's stable. She doesn't have any illnesses that that are chronic, you know, or terminal. And so I do think about what is life going to be like without her. Um, you know, Debbie, you're kind of on that other side, but it's, you know, when you're here, it's just almost like they become your life. So dreading what is it going to look like? It's like it's one of those things like you think about your life and say, okay, God, I'm 51, I'm single, I don't have children. What is happening? But then on the flip side, you're like, but what would my life be without her? And so um it's kind of like when you juxtapose the two, it's just like you just kind of go on, right? You don't know what you don't know, but just thinking about the time when that time comes. And the reality of it is when we were talking about just all of the stress, the depression, and anxiety, a lot of caregivers go before the person that they're caring for. So while we're dreading what may happen to them, always keep in perspective that, again, that take care of you is so very important. Denise, it was how I found you, you know, when I was like, okay, I want to give back to the community that I belong to. I want to serve the community that I belong to. And then I discovered this philosophy of selffulness during the process. And it's like, you know, that sweet spot between being selfish, which we typically feel when we take respite. Like it took me a while before I even understood what respite meant and to take time to go. It was like, oh, I can't go away for that long. I need somebody to take care of my, you know, but you realize you have to make it happen because life goes on. Like, so are you going to just stay in this box, your own silo of just caring for a person? Or are you going to figure out how can we make this happen? And then on the flip side, again, being selfless, like I was initially with my mom, that's reckless. It's like, you have to take care of yourself. So I say that selffulness is that sweet spot between selfish and selfless, where we take care of ourselves so that we can better take care of our caree. So, the dread is there, but also the reality that life is happening every day. So being present, look at we talk about it being hot, but now we have flowers, spring flowers, it's pretty, and I could go out for a walk. So I think with caregiving, there's so many different factors. It's unpredictable. You could be having a great minute, and then the next minute something happens, and it requires you. It's almost like the emergencies become your urgency. So it's like, I gotta do it now. I gotta do it now. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation, and I'm glad that my fellow panelists and myself were able to be transparent, to share the real about caregiving. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly.
I want to mention for those who are joining us live, if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to post them in the chat room.
Denise,
Debbie,
can I say
yes,
something about
yes,
dread?
I was,
This
yeah, I
dread
was just,
thing is
yeah, I was just going to go to.
You know, it's different with my dad. Once I knew he was stable after a while, I did not have that dread until later in his life. And then I did have that dread, knowing in both my dad's case, he didn't have it. Well, I guess he did have like a terminal diagnosis, but not really. But my husband did. In both cases, I knew where it was heading. In both cases, it was a different feeling. I think with both of them, as they deteriorated, it was that internal struggle of, I'm not wishing that it's over, right? But for their sake, I am. But yet I feel so guilty because I don't want to wish for that, right? And in both cases, you think you're prepared, you're mentally trying to figure out, when's it going to be? I was always, especially with my husband, is it now? Is it this? Is this going to be the end? Is his number? All the things. And it didn't happen whenever I thought it was going to happen. It came out of nowhere, even though, he had a terminal diagnosis. And the minute that they were both gone, I said, I can't believe I wished for this. And I think I forgot what I was witnessing and how awful it was for them. But it's that guilt that you feel of even thinking that thought. I mean, it's terrible, but I think it's something when someone is in those final stages, that it's hard not to do because you just don't want to see your loved ones suffer, but it does evoke a feeling of guilt that you would even want such a thing.
I think your point is excellent because we have these thoughts that we judge then because they are thoughts that we think make us an uncaring person. And we are empathetic, caring people. And to have a thought that seems the opposite, then we think, well, what does this make me? And in reality, we all have those thoughts. We all have those thoughts. And I think about pain and suffering in a caregiving situation involves a caree and it involves us. And we're trying to figure out how do we navigate pain and suffering in a way that feels humane for both of us. And that is not an easy equation to get to the answer for. It sometimes doesn't feel like it adds up. It's out of balance. How do we figure it out? Yeah. I think it's so helpful for us all to say, what are our thoughts out loud, to know that we all have these thoughts. We have just about 5 minutes left. And I'd love to close with a conversation around what do you wish the family caregiver who's managing that medical emergency today had in terms of support and help that you think would make a difference?
To me, it's this community. It's knowing that you have a community of other family caregivers who can relate to what you're saying, who understand when you say vulnerable things like we've shared, who don't judge you, and who just get it, right? And who can be your guides through this difficult and most times brand new situation that you're trying to figure out.
You know what else too? I think it always helps to see someone else in the experience. It's hard to imagine someone else experiencing the same. And if you can see someone else and hear them talk about it, I think that's really quite powerful. Angelina, what would you add in terms of what you would love a family caregiver to receive in terms of help and support?
Ah, that's a great question. I definitely would love to see for other caregivers to have that additional physical support from friends and family members or just, the community around them. A lot of people do get in the habit of, saying, hey, I'll be there for you if you ever need anything, or, you know, offering in passing, to assist, but there's very few that end up following through. It's understandable that everyone has their own life that they're living and they have their own experiences. But when, someone they know around them becomes a caregiver, it's almost like they forget that, the caregiver needs support and their care person needs support. So if there's something that they can do, because we're not always in the mindset to delegate tasks to others. That's something that comes with the caregiving experience years down. And even then, we're not upfront about delegating those tasks. But, finding ways that they can take something off of the caregiver's plate. So my hope for other caregivers is that someone will step up to the plate to help take things off of their plate for them.
A family caregiver I connected with a few years ago was caring for her husband who has ALS, and she's raising their two young sons. And she had a friend who every week stopped by to get the laundry. She would take the laundry home, and a few days later, she would leave it. And she always left it on the front porch, and it was always folded. So it wasn't just, I know, doesn't that sound nice? It wasn't just that someone did the laundry for her. It was folded in a really beautiful way. And I thought, what an expression of love and support. I could cry thinking about it. Could you imagine opening your front door on a Friday morning and there's this laundry basket of folded laundry? And it's also this appearance of, this was something I loved doing for you. Because we always worry about, oh my gosh, someone isn't going to like doing this. Was this really true expression of just utter support and love? Dawnita, what would you add?
I think the lady summed it up. I mean, from community, from asking, and I know, to your point, Angelina, in the beginning, you don't know who to ask, what to ask. But I think over time, if you pay attention to the people that do show up and ask for what you need, I think we just don't do it enough. I've built a team, so I know who to call for what when I need something. I'm so grateful for the new caregiver who started when I had my surgery. She does my laundry. So that story really resonated with me, folds it and everything. She she loves order. And I say, listen, I don't have a problem with it. I keep a clean house, but I have a lot of clutter and all that too. So if you want to go ahead, she straightened out my drawers. So all of that, I think relinquishing control. I think one thing too, we want to control everything and everybody. but when it's new, you just don't know. So having a community or someone that you can see to say, hey, these things are normal, these feelings are normal, kind of just let things go, let people help and step in, then I think that would really help them, especially processing a whole emergency situation.
Something you said I think is so critical is that I think we strive to keep in control because something uncontrollable has happened in our life. And it's uncontrollable for us every day going forward. It makes sense then that we are hyper about being in control because it's very difficult to manage the uncontrollable. And I guess I would just maybe add that you guys have really articulated that there is a process and there's room for growth as we go through this experience, that who we were yesterday can be who we become tomorrow, and that we can give ourselves the space to figure out, how do I continue to evolve and grow? And that life continues for us. Life continues for us.
Yeah, and I think another word, really is grace.
Yes.
Caregivers too, we're so hard on ourselves. We make mistakes. I mean, I remember I gave my mom her PM meds for AM, and it was just like, it's like, and as you would say, Denise, we should on ourselves all the time. I should have been more careful. I should have been, but because we're so tired, we have a lot going on, we have to extend ourselves grace, going through this journey.
I really thought the cause of my dad's death was going to be me. And that when they pronounced him dead and signed his death certificate, it would say cause of death, Dawnita M. Brown. Because I just thought I was going to do something that was just going to be the end. Now, that never happened, but that is part of what we dread, right? That we are unintentionally causing harm. And that's the other piece about being hypervigilant, because we always want to be what brings comfort and peace and quality of life. It's what drives us. And as we think about that as the equation for our caree, it's important that we have the equation for ourselves around that: comfort, peace, and quality of life for ourselves too. Okay, thanks so much to our panelists. You guys were great. Angelina, Dawnita, Debbie, thank you guys so much. And before you guys leave, I'd love if you could put contact information in the chat room. If you have a social media account you'd love people to follow, if you have a website, both, that would be great. And for those of you who are watching the archive, I will include contact information in the show notes. I'm going to stop the recording for now, and I'm going to ask those who are joining live just to stay, and I'll tell you how to do the evaluation and get your CEUs. Again, thanks so much to our panelists. Thanks to those who joined us live. Thanks to those who are watching the archive. I'm Denise Brown. Stop by caringourway.com for all our archives of all these really great panel discussions. Okay, thanks everyone.